it's Matt here, and welcome to an update on a model that has been something which has been languishing in the background for quite a long time at this point. And some people who have been familiar with the channel actually recognise the model. It's actually an entry for Brick Model Rarida's OcTRAINber contest for 2018, and it is actually a New Haven version of the USRA 080 switcher. Now, obviously, being a New Haven variant, there are a couple of differences to the standard USRA model, primarily in the locations of some of the equipment. So, for example, where you'd normally have your dynamo at the front here above the front chimney, it's actually located here on top of the firebox. And there's a few other differences in terms of the equipment and where it's positioned, etc, etc. So the last time people saw this model and saw me discussing it, it was still in Lego Digital Designer, and it wasn't until I just said about 6 hours ago that this model has actually been transferred into Studio. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Primarily, it's that there's certain pieces that are available in Studio that aren't available in Lego Digital Designer, and there's a few other stipulations as well about what parts are and aren't available, and some of that is to do with the fact that Lego doesn't always necessarily want the parts available from their back catalogue in Lego Digital Designer, and there's a few other things. So, disclaimer, this model is not complete, although it is a lot better, and I've actually got a mechanical example, so I know it does work. There are a few things with this model that aren't accurate, aren't complete, or are otherwise missing. And some of that is true of the original model it came from, but it's slightly different with this one. So, primarily, you're probably thinking, why do I want to revisit this model? Well, my mantra for the OcTRAINber contest, certainly the last 2 times I entered, was it would have to be something that I would want to build. So, the contest for 2017, which I think was the first I entered a tram, and that wasn't something I'd personally want to build at the time. It would be something that I'd possibly want to build to test stuff with. So that tram from 2017 might be worth off testing, powered up, and doing the sort of like tram theory thing I want to demonstrate. But as a model, it's not what I'd normally build. So it's the wrong era. It's sort of like 70s era, 70s, 80s sort of era tram rather than 1930s, 40s. And then obviously with 2018 we had, I can't remember what the theme of 2018 was, but this USRA New Haven, well, the New Haven copy of the USRA ISO was what I designed at the time. And then 2019, I think, was layouts which I did not partake in. And then 2020 was when I did the Ice House, if I remember correctly. And obviously the Ice House is something I'd want to build, but obviously I'd want to take what I'd got and then change it round to be a Mills module and all that sort of shebang. So let's progress on. So primarily, the reason why I wanted to do more work on the USRA 080 is because I want to build it, and the original model, even though it was from 2018, so it's less than 3 years ago, it's probably more like 2.5, well, just over 2.5 years ago at this point, when I last finished working on it properly. There were a few issues, and I kind of sort of skipped over them. So some of the structure wasn't there, some of the details weren't there, and I did sort of say in the entry that, because of stipulations of the fact it's all digital model, there are things I'd want to change when building it in the flesh, and I sort of went, well, I'd love to, but there are certain restrictions I have based on Lego Digital Design that I can't get around, and there were things that I wasn't that comfortable using Studio at the time, so I'm a bit more comfortable now, so I can change a few bits and pieces. So that's why I've come here. We've done there's been a lot of changes to the model, and there hasn't been a lot of change to the model. And I'll explain it in a bit, but primarily it's still roughly the same model you all know and love from 2018, but it's now in Studio, and there's now a few more tweaks to it. So primarily you'll notice that roughly the body is all the same, everything's still in the same position, everything's still at the same angle, everything's still using the same parts. But however, those of you who with a bit more keener eye will have noticed that the front coupler is now a BMR knuckle. So that's actually a different part entirely. So that is because I've actually transitioned to using BMR knuckles as the de facto coupler for my fleet. So I think about 85 to 90% of my fleet has now been converted to BMR knuckles. There are a few outlying pieces, but as I'm not actually using them in either a show setting or around my home, there's no real need to have them out, so they've gone into storage. And I'll say when I've finished designing the storage facility, I can then transfer them from the sort of like the big storage crates into their like storage transfer things, and I can actually take models in and out of those as I need to work on them. So obviously the knuckles have been a major change. The other real difference you can probably see from this has actually be the cylinder pipe. So this has actually been a bit of a conflab, because originally this was actually one stud further in, and it was a lot shorter. So this change has actually been based off what the real thing has as a different thing. So the problem I've got is that how I've designed this cylinder assembly is that there's some Technic bricks here, and the main part here that actually comes out is a 3x5 L-shaped Technic beam. So that actually is the main part of the cylinder, and that's actually held in for two of the bits here, so the rest of the three actually stick out, so the cylinders are actually 10 wide. That's pretty much, unfortunately, a side effect of trying to get full valve gear in. So the cylinder is a bit wider than 8, but there are reasonable details. The problem I've got is that if I was because the steam pipe comes up centrally from the cylinders, there's not been an easy way to do that. So instead what I've done is use this 1x1 round plate with the bar attachment, and then just stuck some pieces on the end. And I've actually done the same effect on the other side, but I've actually changed it around so it's a bit steeper. I am trying to work out the best angle for it. It does seem to be a bit of a steeper pipe to the cylinders than some of the locos, so I think this side isn't actually that accurate, and it should be a bit more steeper as per this side. So it should roughly be in line with this this level of the running plate, and as you can see, it's quite high. It's just below the cab windows on the real thing, so it should line up roughly with this beam and just under that clip. So this side is actually a lot more accurate than this side, even though there's not that much in it, and I do need to change it around, and I might actually change it around again later. And obviously I kind of want to try and get the cylinders to a proper sort of configuration, but it depends on how I can actually manage that within the model. So the primary thing that the model has had changed is the motorizations. Now the original model was a bit of a fudge, I think is probably going to be the best example. So I've not got it actually in Studio to show you, but effectively the original motor was located here. It was a Power Functions L motor, and then that drove a set of gears, which drove another set of gears, which then drove an axle to this wheel, and then that had a little bit of a transfer, and then there was another axle to drive this wheel. So obviously there was a lot of gearing going through. It's not a mechanism. It's a mechanism that would work. To my mind, it isn't, however, a very good solution. It's based off a design I saw on a brass loco, so it has a basis in reality for working in terms of modelling, but it's not the best in terms of performance. That you'd lose a lot of power in the transmission, and that's something I don't really want. I kind of want it to be functional more than anything else. So primarily I was trying to rework this model so it was a bit more better. So the motor was actually flipped 90 degrees, so the output was actually this end. It was moved further back, so pretty much the cab backhead would have to disappear, hence why there's bits of it just randomly floating about on the floor, as it were. And the whole purpose was that the motor was going to sit in here in the firebox area, so it's nice and deep. The model itself is 6 wide at the firebox, not 8. That is as per USRA drawings, which I've purloined off the internet. So that is accurate that it is a 6 wide firebox. So you do get this nice deep indent, and the boiler is roughly the same width as the firebox. So again, we've got a 6 wide boiler, 6 wide firebox. So the motor would stick in there, it would have a gear, and then it would actually go down and transfer the power to the wheels. Now that's a design I'd kind of toyed with previously and then abandoned, and then it's a very similar configuration to some of the locos I've seen. So I kind of wanted to copy that in some respects, so it'd be a bit easier to build. The problem I've got is that even trying to do that, there were still a few hiccups with it. Trying to fit everything in was a bit of a pain, and it was doable, but obviously it wasn't the best. So I had to try and find another solution, and the other problem I've got is that trying to fit everything together was a bit of a pain, and trying to get everything working correctly again wasn't always that easy. So I kind of was having a bit of a think, and then sort of had the idea that as a switch engine there wouldn't actually be that much need for speed, and certainly with the switching layouts or switching layout this will eventually run on, there wouldn't actually be any need for it to do or pull more than, say, 4 or 5 cars plus a caboose if it was required to do so. So power isn't actually that needed, or the amount of power I was intending to fit this with wasn't required. So changing it round to something else would actually free up a motor, free up a battery box. I mean, I've currently fitted the tender with the viewers, I think, so that can now get reclaimed and reused elsewhere. And there's a few of the things I'd kind of wanted to change around with it. So I was thinking late last night, and then I came to this conclusion that why don't I rebuild it using circuit cubes and Bluetooth? So because I got a spare Bluetooth kit that was lying around. The other one's actually going in an 040 B&O dockside tanker at some point. So my primary thing was, well, why don't I build a test example using the circuit cubes Bluetooth kit, and that was built, and I shared the like the head end where the motors join the transfer axle on Facebook, and the reason why I've kind of wanted to do this sort of thing is to use the circuit cubes is that it kind of frees up a lot of space in the boiler, and it's a really useful way of reducing the amount of space I need. And the other thing is that with me using roller bearings and trying to get making everything as almost like you would find on an O scale or something like that model rail, where everything's on roller bearings, it's all smooth, it's all got knuckle couplers and etc., is that I don't need as much power to start stuff moving off. So the use of an L motor, although it would be nice, wouldn't actually be required. So I can actually fit in the circuit cube motors. So, and to fit that in, The chassis is broadly similar to what the original model has. Now, it's obviously been updated a little bit. The test model I've got does actually need changing as well anyway, but this is primarily what it is. So we have primarily a transfer axle between the front and the rear, and obviously because Lego don't make an axle the right length, I've had to actually cut one down slightly to size. So this is actually slightly different to how it is on my test model, but this is accurate to how it should be. So we've got the rear axle here and the leading axle here. These two central ones are actually flangeless, and that's partly to get it locomotive round R40 curves. Whether that will happen or not, I'm not entirely sure, but that was what the intention was shrink the chassis down to as short as possible, fit these with blinds wheels, so these can just float effectively. Everything's supposed to be traction bands because we're want to maximise the amount of traction we've got as a switching loco, and just we want to try and make it as powerful as possible with but as compact as possible, and that's primarily the reason why there's no trailing or leading axles on this loco. It's because it's a switch engine. It doesn't need to go fast, so you don't need the redundant wheel sets effectively. So all the weight is on the drivers, so it helps tractive force. So everything's got traction tyres on the what will be the real thing. You've also got this transfer axle. Power is actually transferred right at the back here. So effectively you've got this where you got one of the bearing sort of bricks for the holders. So you've actually got one here. You've got another one here. You got another one here. So these are actually the 4x4 Technic bricks with the 2x2 cutout in the middle. So they're actually quite good for maintaining a squared off chassis. So I've got two at the front primarily because I can use them, and it actually saves bricks at the front, and it keeps a bit of structural integrity at the front. The rear is a bit different obviously because I've got the transfer bit. So what happens is that you've got this cross axle linking the front and rear axles, and that actually transfers power to those axles as well. And then you've got this transfer axle going up into the boiler. So this is actually coming from the motors down into the wheels. Now that's obviously not as nice as I'd like. You still have some daylight between the loco boiler and the frames, but I will be revising this down. The frames I think may have been a little too thin on the 2018 entry for the contest, so I can beef them up a little bit now that I'm actually building it in the flesh. I don't think I'd be complained about that much that I'd reinforce the chassis a bit to make sure it actually functioned and didn't just fall apart as soon as it went over switch a bit roughly. So obviously the chassis is still under revision, but you can sort of see there's trunks missing in a few places, but this is primarily just to test the mechanism, make sure it all fits. So you've got a 2x4 Technic plate there that spans the chassis, and that actually has this 5.5L axle in, and that's actually got to stop 1L in, and that actually fits in quite neatly on top of this 2x4 plate. So that's just enough space to actually fit the bevel gear underneath. So it's got plenty of grip on that, and then also that goes up to the power. So obviously I can't show you precisely what is in here, obviously because it's all enclosed. So I can show up bring up a photo of the demonstration build. But effectively, you've got these you've got this absolutely massive bevel gear in the middle, and then you've got these two circuit cubes motors either side of that. So that's the bevel gear. So you've got one motor here, another motor here, and they actually drive using the 14-tooth bevel gear, I think it is. So this is a 20-tooth, 14-tooth. So the 14-tooth drives the 20. You get a bit of gearing down, so your speed is reduced, but your equivalent tractive effort goes up slightly. It's not as much as it wouldn't be as much an increase, but because this is effectively a locomotive that would go along at not much more than walking pace, speed isn't required. And then effectively, what the other work I've been doing to the model outside of changing around all the motorization is actually just to change around some of the detailing. So this absolutely massive piece of pipework here was actually missing off the original entry. I've now added that in. There's still a load of pipework at the rear for the injectors, which is missing, which I do want to add. You've got the air cylinder here, and I've now added that in. So that was actually missing originally, so I've added that in. This, I think this is supposed to be the pump for the air brakes. That has actually been changed around a lot, so that's actually a lot more realistic now. It's actually smaller. It's actually mounted lower down than it was originally. So it was a bit higher before. It's now been mounted a plate lower. It's been shrunk a little bit in height, so it's a lot more accurate compared to photos of the real thing. There's also a lot of work needed to be done on the model this side, so there's some pipe work which should be along here. That's all missing. There should be some pipe work, and I think a water injector down here. All that pipe work and that injector are missing, so that all needs adding in. And effectively, it's just a lot of little bits and pieces which should exist but don't exist on the model. So effectively, it's just a case of I've got a good base now, and I can do some revision. The other thing I've really done is thin out the cab a bit. Now the reason for that is partially it's just an appearance thing. So effectively what I've been doing is shrinking what's actually here. So I've been able to shrink down the cab a little bit, so it's a bit thinner at this end. So it's not just a big chunky bit, it's this central bit's a bit thinner. But what I might do is that's a reasonably good arch, so I'm not too bothered about changing it too much after this point, but I do want to try and fill it in. Maybe try and change this to a 3 wide bit across here to try and remove some of the gap possibly, or lift some of the design from Mike's brick train depot Mikado. I'll sort of do a sort of imitation copy of that, because that's actually quite a nice curved roof, and I might see how accurate that is compared to the real things. Obviously this is the reason why I'm revising this model, is to try and make it a bit more realistic and buildable. So obviously I kind of want to try and do that, including trying to make it look a bit better. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the update. There's not a lot else. There's been a few other minor tweaks and changes to it. And this thing here you see in front of you is actually a spacer. So the full model, based off the USRA diagram, should be about 30 point... I think it was like 30 point something studs, top to bottom. And the major measurements are all here. So effectively, this is your 30 studs along the bottom here. So from the rear effectively from the rear of the cab to the axle is 9 studs. So you've got 9 there. The gaps between the rails are 4 studs, which you have here. Gap between from the front of the middle of the axle, front axle, to the middle of the cylinders is 3.4, I think it was, studs. When you convert it into the 8 studs to 10 feet ratio. And you got another bit here to the front of the pilot, and then you got this bit from the pilot to the knuckle. Now obviously this, where the knuckle is a bit different because we're Lego, so things have been changed a bit. So, but to be honest with you, I'm not too bothered. That's not too much of an extension, and to be honest with you, because the pilots are actually oversized anyway, it's not too much of a bother in my mind. I actually quite like it's a little clunky in terms of aesthetics, but it's fine from my perspective. The one thing I am considering is raising the cylinder's upper plate. Now that's not the most realistic thing. These are actually kind of accurate for how they are, but the cylinders themselves I think should actually be slightly taller in height. So I'm not sure how I'd get around that really, but it's kind of looking okay how it is, so I might just leave it. So that's pretty much it for the update. There's not a it's looking a lot better. It's a lot neater, but there's still lots of revisions for this model to do, and I kind of want to try and make it as good as I can, while I can, before I start actually buying more pieces on Bricklink and then trying to build it in the flesh. So that's it for now for this update, and obviously I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again real soon.